All right. Good afternoon, Chair, Member Garrett, and staff. Lobby is open. Recording has begun.
Great. Thank you, Dustin. I will call to order the Executive Management Team meeting of Liquor and Cannabis Board for Wednesday, September 8th, 2021. I'm David Postman, the board chair. With me is member Ollie Garrett. Member Russ Hauge is on leave today. Two small adjustments to the agenda. Rick Garza is not going to be able to join us today, and we will hear from Enforcement and Education Director Chandra Beatty first when we get to that part of the report. So with that, the first item we have up is approval of the minutes from our August 11th Executive Management Team meeting. A motion to approve that?
I move approval of August 11th EMT meeting minutes.
Great, and I'll second that. So that is approved. And then we will jump now into department reports and start with Enforcement and Education. Director Brady.
Thank you and good afternoon. I'm here to present some August stats to you and share with you the great work that the Enforcement and Education Division has been doing for the past month. And Dustin's going to drive for me. So thank you, Dustin. Next slide. So in the support and education arena, you can see that the totals for August were impressive. Over 2,000 educational contacts, 344 hours of education given, and almost 30,000 people received education. So you can see how that's divided into the tobacco, vapor, liquor, and cannabis areas, with the top number of people receiving education in the that's supposed to be 2,900, not 30,000. So
I was doing that math myself, Director.
Yeah, pretty impressed. I was like, we must have gone to a couple of concerts. So like potentially that one is extra 3, 4, 5, 6, 7. Yeah, doing that math on the fly, it's actually 3,000 people, but that's still impressive. Next slide. Our top 10 educational topics, you can see, are listed. 59% of them were related to public safety topics. And at the very bottom, you can see masked makes the list. So some education increased about people having their masked cards for serving liquor this last month. And in August, when we were looking at complaints, you can see there were 153 complaints logged in the month of August. And as you would not be surprised to know, COVID-19 complaints have reemerged as our #1 complaint. Our division goal is to close out 95% of our complaints within 60 days. So you can see that they met that goal in closing those complaints out. As you know, some of our complaints are a little more complicated and will take longer than 60 days, but that is their goal that they strive for. And we're back to a place where 50% of our complaints are COVID-19 related. Thanks, Dustin. So when we look specifically at cannabis, you can see the jump there. We looked at 39 complaints for the cannabis industry, and these particular graphs do not include the COVID-19 complaints. When we look at liquor complaints, we had 36 in the liquor industry, not including the COVID-19 complaints. And tobacco and vape, we had 10, and typically those are related to youth access when we see those tobacco complaints. When you look at COVID-19 complaints, you can see that those jumped up in August, and you can see that 50% of our complaints were related to COVID-19, 153 total and 78 specific to COVID-19. We'll see that continue to grow. When we start looking at AVNs issued in August, we stayed pretty steady to July with 90. And remember that much of this is related to, as you can see, the numbers are higher in liquor as we're back out doing compliance checks, and their percentages of compliance were just a little bit lower there. When we look at dispute resolutions in the liquor industry, and that's our hearings office. Remember, you can see that in August, we had 33 of those uncontested and paid. 16 of those were informal hearings, and one forwarded to a formal hearing from informal. And just so to be clear, none of those went straight to formal hearing. When we look at the cannabis industry, 4 were paid out uncontested, and we had none request to go to either informal or formal hearings. And liquor compliance checks is staying pretty steady, 75, 76, 77%. And we're getting an average of 250 compliance checks done. That compliance rate, you can see that we need to be out there doing those checks because that's how we make an impact in the industry and changing youth access. Cannabis compliance check, July was a little bit rougher of a month for cannabis, but as you can see, they jumped back up in August and are at 94%. When we look at tobacco and vapor, August looks like a rough month for them, 65% for tobacco and vapor compliance checks for youth access. So that's something we definitely want to continue to impact. Thanks, Justin. Premise checks, just to give you some numbers, 2,500 in August for liquor. I was shocked when I saw this number. This is our retail and MIW locations, and there's a total of 18,184 locations that our folks are responsible for out there in the liquor industry. Cannabis premise checks, we got 264 done in the month of August. And tobacco and vapor, 327. So you can see that our people are getting out there and making contact and having conversations and doing casual education with their licensees. Admin versus field hours, you can see that we are spending 68% of our time administrative and 32% in the field. So remember, we've talked about as the restrictions in COVID come in and relax and get stronger. And then you can see how that flips pre-COVID, I'm told. Remember, I've only been here 6 months, but pre-COVID, I'm told that these numbers were reversed. And so it was more 60-40 in favor of being in the field. And then for our accomplishments for the division for the month of August, we are really focusing on partnerships with other agencies and other divisions, and working really closely with the other divisions within WSLCB to ensure the best outcomes for the agency and our industries. The directors had another directors lunch this month. And just some examples of the ways we're working together is the CCRS transition and planning. And you saw the hopefully the wonderful web presentation that went live today. I'm going to attend the licensing division meeting to present about some of the work that's happening in the enforcement and education division. The joint quarterly marijuana licensing and enforcement team met. They meet licensing and enforcement together to discuss current issues, cases, situations, things to resolve. It's a great opportunity and demonstration of how our teams work together. And then we've all worked together to look at the potential impacts of the draft bill. We had 2 lieutenant promotions, one for Lieutenant Larissa Sigmund and one for Lieutenant EP Hackenberg. We are working with HR, and actually an offer was made for that position. And I think we have a start date for an HR 3 position that will work specifically to fill our enforcement education vacancies. We are on target for October 1st for the examiner's transition. We have fully implemented our law enforcement legislation, which changes quite a bit of policy for us. So our training team has been having flash training sessions on Fridays to make sure that people are informed about those changes and have the opportunity to ask questions. And then you saw that we sent out an enforcement bulletin about Delta 8 to mirror the one that went out about Delta 9 to keep the industry informed about the work we're doing too. I sent out a new field visit schedule for the next year so folks know where I'll be and when I'll be able to visit. I visited Spokane in August, and I also got to attend a really amazing law enforcement memorial end of watch motorcycle ride from Montana to Washington, which was amazing. And then the last slide is just a visual of my field visit planner, so you each have it if you would like to. Any questions?
Ollie, any questions for Chandra?
Okay, there we go. No, that was a very good and thorough report. Thank you.
Absolutely. Thank you, Ollie.
I have one, if we could go back to slide 5, Dustin, the cannabis complaints chart. I just wondered what happened from July to August, where complaints were 15 in July and 39, I think it says. I can't quite read it on my screen, but that's the biggest jump I see in this date range that we've looked at. What's going on there?
So I'll look it up and confirm it to you. If I had to make an educated guess based on all the data I looked at this week, I would say compliance checks and youth access.
Oh, okay, right. Okay, yeah, and I guess I could overlay it with what that cannabis compliance checks look like. I bet you're right. Okay, yeah, I just didn't see any that jumped as much as that. Well, yes, I see. Yeah, cannabis compliance July was looks really high too. But yeah, okay. If you take a look at some point, but I think you're right.
So what it looks like to me, looking at the data, is we did a large number of checks in July, and the AVNs came in August. But I'm going to confirm that, and I will follow up with you to confirm.
Okay, great. Appreciate that.
Absolutely.
Good. Thank you for that, and thank you for the report.
Thank you.
Next up is legislative update and agency request legislation review with Chris Thompson, our Director of Legislative Relations. Chris?
Good afternoon, Mr. Chairman, board members, and executive management team. Good to be with you this afternoon. So a quick update on where things stand. They're still in process with 2 agency request items. I'll start first with a bill that would be a joint request of the LCB and the Department of Agriculture. This bill would establish a new and more rigorous and effective system for cannabis testing labs in our state to assist and work with the industry in Washington. So this also is a result in part of discussions at the Cannabis Science Task Force, which was created by the legislature a couple of years ago. The proposal that has emerged from that group and those discussions envisions a 3-agency coordinated team assembled to establish the quality standards for the testing labs. So the legislation, which, as I said, would be jointly requested by LCB and the Department of Agriculture, because both of those agencies have regulatory authority implicated by the bill. In the one case, LCB is transferring some authority, and it's being transferred to the Department of Ecology. So that's the reason for that approach to the package. What the legislation would do is a few things. It would create an interagency coordination team. This would be made up of Agriculture, LCB, and Department of Health. The Department of Agriculture would be the lead agency. And these 3 agencies would work together to establish the substantive requirements for testing labs. The legislation also authorizes Department of Agriculture to establish those standards or requirements in rule. The bill also envisions that there'd be admin support for the team from Department of Agriculture, but separate from, it's not a part of the actual legislation, but part of the package overall are budget requests or decision packages from all three of those agencies to add a little bit of particular staff to this effort. So the budget request is separate, and I didn't plan to address that today. We're still working on the decision package and the fiscal note for that. But each of the three agencies, generally, I'll say, is envisioned for this. The way this is to work as proposed is a couple, three or so FTE at each of the agencies, particularly in scientific disciplines, in order to put together the substantive requirements. There's an additional section of the bill that would clarify the difference between product standards and lab standards. I-502 sort of conflated those two things, and some additional clarity is needed there. So the bill does that. It would also contain an affirmative directive statement that would explicitly require labs to obtain and maintain accreditation from the state to operate in this manner. Currently, there's an implied or implicit suggestion of that, but this bill would make it explicit that labs have to seek, obtain, and continue to hold accreditation. As a side note, this envisions the system, the program that we have before us. It envisions the Department of Ecology would also play a role. Their role, variety of ways of describing it. I think of it in terms of an audit, but ecology would go, once the standards are established and Department of Agriculture has adopted those standards and rule, then ecology would go out to the labs and determine whether they are meeting those standards. So I think of that as an audit function, but take that sort of on an informal lay basis for that terminology. I would also like to add that initially the concept here was for a second piece of legislation that would come from Department of Ecology as a request dealing with the timeline for some of this activity. At this point, the Department of Ecology has decided to hold off on that proposal for a year. They will not be requesting legislation in the upcoming cycle for this, and I think that's a positive step. It will put us in a position next spring to know a lot more about what we're dealing with, what the legislature's approved, and would affirm the direction that we're going, and would clarify what further changes might be needed over time. One last thing on the bill itself. We just got a draft back from the code revisor, and we've had some suggestions from Department of Ecology. We're working on making some changes. So our initial draft deleted provisions related to the process for labs paying fees to Department of Ecology once their part of the system is up and running in 2024. And we had deleted those provisions in an attempt to coordinate with Ecology's legislation, which now is not going forward this year. So we'd like to restore those provisions to current law, even though they're not effective till 2024. Kind of a technical point, but that's part of the legislation. As I mentioned, we're also working on a decision package, and Jim Morgan is working in coordination with Department of Agriculture on aligning our decision packages and making sure everything is properly coordinated across the three agencies. So that's what I have on this one. We haven't had very much stakeholder feedback outside of the team on this. There's been some, but not a great deal. We've had a lot more stakeholder feedback on the other proposal that I was going to take up next. The other proposal would be a request from LCB to, one way to put it would be to close essentially a regulatory loophole in cannabis oversight currently in Washington, although it's an issue in states across the country that have cannabis programs. There are 150 or so and counting compounds that have been identified from the cannabis plant. Our current regulatory authority is tied solely to one of those compounds, just Delta-9 THC. And that's how, in current law, THC concentration is defined, is strictly, specifically only Delta-9. So we believe legislation is needed to give the agency regulatory authority over any and all compounds from the cannabis plant that are psychotropic and intoxicating. So this would include Delta-8, which you've probably heard lots about. Others, which we think are probably not far behind in terms of emerging as a focus and a product that's out there. Delta-10, there are a number of others, and who knows how many more might be identified as having commercial value and emerge in a marketplace. If we don't extend our authority, we could be looking at a lot of products that are intoxicating and are unregulated and essentially untaxed, at least in a manner that cannabis is. So what this bill would do is introduce a number of terms and define them in statute. It would revise a few current definitions of terms that are already in statute under the Controlled Substances Act. Important ones included there are THC concentration would no longer be limited to Delta-9, and the definition of a processor is also revised. It's expanded to allow for, let me see, where did that go? We discovered in working on putting this legislation together that we had some processors operating not strictly within the confines of the license privileges established. And what we're trying to say in this legislation is that a processor could conduct an expanded range of types of activities, not just processing marijuana, but also doing compounds, converting, preparing directly or indirectly by extraction, other components of the plant. And so we think that is the intent here is to establish a more realistic range of activities that processors would be allowed to conduct. We think possibly we need a technical amendment to the current bill draft so that we put these provisions also in the licensing statute, in addition to the definition of a processor within the Controlled Substances Act. That's a technical detail. We're working on that. A couple additional points I want to mention quickly. We're in this legislation. We're allowing for the use of synthetic cannabinoids that are created from plant material grown within the 502 system. We're also prohibiting the use of artificial cannabinoids. The bottom line is we're working toward trying to establish a regime where this agency has authority to regulate any of the compounds which are psychotropic and impairing from the cannabis plant. And we're trying also to say this does not include hemp, provided that we're below the 0.3% THC level. We have we've distributed a draft to stakeholders. That went out on September 1st, and we had to ask them for feedback by September 7th, given the governor's deadline. But we got a lot of feedback that was a real serious concern for stakeholders, that didn't provide enough time. So what we've done is gone to the governor's office in OFM and asked for some flexibility here, and they've said yes, but we still have to submit our proposal on time as originally envisioned. But what they're giving us flexibility to do is to come back later with revisions. So our plan is to, and I have notified stakeholders, all those originally that were notified, as well as additional stakeholders that we heard from, that there'll be some more time for them to more carefully go through the draft and to get us their feedback. We also had a discussion, another one this morning on staff to review fiscal issues here. And the decision there at the staff level was that we would not ask for any new funding for this. We think that the work could be some additional work come to the agency as a result of this legislation, but that's work that, you know, is basically our current responsibility, and probably can be handled within current resources. And you know, potentially there's some reserve that could be used if necessary, if we have a big rush initially with new products that industry is asking for approval on packaging and labeling and so forth, and that kind of thing. So I'll get into a conclusion here in a second. We do not anticipate fiscal impact, and our fiscal note won't be seeking any new funds. We are allowing stakeholders some additional time to analyze this proposal and get us more feedback. We do need to submit our materials, and this would include a memo explaining why we need additional time to do additional stakeholder work. But it sounds like we will have the time we need within reason to finish up, finalize our proposal, and ask the governor's office and OFM to make a determination on the revised proposal, not the one that we'll be able to submit this week.
Couple quick things for me. You know, one, since we do have this additional time for feedback, I think it would be important to have another conversation with the board as well. And so as soon as that's possible, and when we have everybody back, which I think might be at a caucus next week, perhaps. I don't know why I'm getting an echo. Sorry. I don't know if Chris, could you mute for 1 second, see if that might help us? So why don't we arrange that? I think, you know, we've obviously been kept up to date as the work was being done by our policy group and others. But I think that it is worthy of a sort of a threshold conversation, since we have this time to look at it. And one of the things, you know, that you mentioned, which I, you know, one points out just how much of this rides on definitions. I think you said, you know, our intent is to, you know, to allow for synthetic, but to prohibit artificial. So we need to define synthetic, define artificial, define all these different processes that result in those things. And it's not easy. And so I think that really gets at to the bigger question, which is, again, to, you know, sort of your description, Chris, is the intent is to establish a more realistic range of what processors can process. That to me is the sort of the nub for us. I think we have to have that conversation and talk about how big of a focus do we envision for processors, and where do we take the market that's been fairly sacrosanct since 502 passed. So I think there's a conversation, is what I'm saying. It's a long way around to say that. So I hope that you and the policy team and others, Dustin, can find a time to get you with the board at one of our upcoming meetings.
We certainly want to do that, Mr. Chairman. I think that's imperative that we do that. And I know that a number of the stakeholders we heard from basically didn't even respond substantively. They, their concern was not having enough time. So, part of the reason we got kind of stuck in this bind is what you were just alluding to, the technical difficulty and complexity of these definitions. And that took more time than we anticipated. And that ate into the time we had originally allotted for. We had planned to allow, 3 weeks for stakeholder review and comment. And that got squeezed to under a week over a holiday weekend because of the technical and scientific and industrial complexity of getting these definitions right and hitting the sweet spot in terms of, what you were also alluding to, the change is coming, and this is a very dynamic and innovative industry, and yet there are a lot of things that where some degree of stability for our Washington State industry is valuable. So we definitely need to give stakeholders more time, and then we'll need to evaluate their thoughts and bring all that back to the board. So,
Right.
Next week will be too soon, but
Sure.
Probably in a 2 to 3 week time frame might be timely to come back to the board and say, here's where we are, here's what we're hearing. What do you think? And this is what we're thinking.
When you have the feedback and you all have a chance to chew on that, why don't we do that? Ollie, any questions for Chris? No? Okay. Great. Chris, anything else?
I just was going to mention that we're still talking with ecology and agriculture about the lab bill. I don't know where we'll end up. I know there is one change to our draft we've already recommended, ecology and agriculture, and we need to talk some more. So there is potential that we may need to revise that bill, and I don't know if we'll have time to do it before submission or if we'll need to do it once the bill arrives in the legislature. But that's just we're not completely finished with that one either. But it's at this point it's technical stuff, so it shouldn't trouble the board too much at this point. So I think I can leave it there and feel like you're fully briefed.
Great, good. Thank you for that. And we will move on now to a licensing update from Becky Smith, the Licensing and Regulation Director.
So
There.
good afternoon.
Hello.
I'm just going to jump right in and hope to save us some time. I just wanted to share with you that on September 2nd, we held our very first social equity work group meeting. That Ollie is a part of our work group, and so this won't be any new news for her, but certainly for you that that I believe it's just the beginning of the collaboration that's necessary to ensure that social equity is really a part and at forefront of what this agency is doing. That 5 years ago, that we embarked on our first I-502 work group meeting as an agency. It really helped us to be successful in the implementation of I-502, and then the legislation that followed, of course, with 5052. But it gave us the opportunity to really embrace the work as an entire agency, not just for licensing, not just for enforcement, but the entire agency. And it really kept folks involved. It helped us monitor the work, define some roles assigned, and then all the steps that needed to be taken. So I'm really excited about this work. I think that even though licensing began the work, I think that the whole agency participating on this work group will certainly send us in a good direction and head us with the ability to get this work done efficiently and effectively. Ollie, do you want to add anything? You're muted.
I know my mouse was acting up. It was frozen. No, I just want to thank you for bringing us all together, the entire agency, to be part of this conversation, because you and I and others in licensing has been working with the Social Equity Task Force, and a lot of conversations and things were going on. And, you know, as I said on the call, we come to realize a lot of things, and through our outreach, things that we know that if given the opportunity, we would have done different. And we now have the opportunity going into a new phase to be more on top of the decisions that we're making and what we're doing as far as with social equity. So I appreciate you bringing the entire agency together on this subject, and the support of the agencies of the agency of us understanding the importance of the social equity work that we are trying to do out there and things. But yeah, thank you.
Thank you.
Mm-hmm.
So I also want to just jump right along and talk a little bit about special occasion licenses, because we have, you know, that they continue to come in. But what we've seen in the last 2 weeks is we've had about 163 applications come in in 2 weeks, but 50 of those have been canceled. So they've come back and then canceled their event. And then we've had 20 go from what would have been an in-person, you know, that it would have been an in-person event to virtual event. So I think that people are out there thinking about whether or not they want to hold these in-person events, and another way of being able to have an event that raises money for these nonprofits, but doing it in a way that is mindful of what's going on with COVID and the variants. So just so everybody is aware of that. That we've also in licensing been doing a lot of work with 1480. That this extends the privileges that were allowed during COVID, that continued COVID, that our customer service manager has been working really closely with IT. We're making sure that we're testing out the privileges, so when they go live, that we know that our business licensing service and Liquor and Cannabis Board are talking to one another, so we don't have any hiccups for our applicants along the way. Right now, folks have continued to be able to offer, you know, those endorsements, and some of the work that we have going on too is to make sure that, you know, that the policy work and the work that has already been approved for endorsements continues to align with one another. What we don't want to do is to make this more difficult for our licensees when we've already allowed for the privilege. So again, a lot of work happening. We're going to be doing an in-service training for enforcement in a couple of weeks, and sharing some of this information with them as well. And again, Chandra talked about all of the collaboration with licensing and enforcement, but certainly we see a lot more training happening back and forth so we don't have to duplicate some of the training areas. The other thing I want to, a couple of weeks ago, probably, July, I talked a bit about some alterations that were happening, that we are doing a change in our alterations for cannabis. And so we have, we're going to be reducing the licensees that apply for a change in their floor plan, a change to some of their security, that this has taken, you know, what we've heard from the industry is that this takes a long time, that to put these requests in. Well, what we've decided to do is that we did a pilot in our cannabis unit, and then we moved that over to actually making it happen. So we've worked with customer service. We've worked with our enforcement staff as well. We're going to begin slowly with about 6 of these alteration types going over to customer service, but we'll be operating just like we do on the liquor side. That means that customer service will be taking care of these changes and alterations. We're going to be working with communications to get something out to all of our licensees, but a good direction to head. I think that I'm going to be meeting with a couple of industry folks this afternoon just to let them know about some of these changes. But again, you know, that's something that's been a long time coming. We've been working on it, but we wanted to make sure before we hit the go button that that we had some of the hiccups. We know that we are going to have hiccups along the way. I spoke to my staff about this, that we know that there's going to be some things that we might have to pull back and send back to the cannabis investigators, but certainly, you know, that we're going to try to work out some of the processes and then add more of those change requests over to our customer service staff as well. And then, oh, go ahead.
One note on that, just that was a concern actually that I heard first from my fellow 2 board members. So before that is disseminated too widely, can you just make sure that Member Garrett and Hauge get all the details of what that change is on and how we're going to go about doing that? Because I think, you know, the board members likely hear these sorts of complaints from licensees as well, and we've had some that we've reviewed in our adjudication. So if we can get a detailed briefing for board, that would be great.
Absolutely, and we actually have that ready to go. So we'll certainly, myself and my deputy will swing back around and share our process. We have a training plan prepared for training our customer service staff, training our enforcement staff, and again, some communication that's going to go out to from our communications division.
Yeah. Great, thank you.
And then a couple of things, Small Business Fair, October 12th. So this is licensing has been working with communications team to prepare a short presentation that will be offered along with 6 other agencies, state agencies. We'll be sharing some of our recently recreated resources, such as a starter's guide for liquor, and also the social equity application webpage. The licensing team will be hosting a booth during the small fair, so folks can visit it virtually and ask questions. You know, that we usually don't get a lot of questions, but we certainly want to make sure that we resource it. So if a question comes in regarding cannabis or liquor or a special occasion license, that we have staff there that are prepared to answer any of those questions. And then, Ollie, I did want to share with you that we have been working on a survey to speak about remote work. That even though it's not specific to licensing, it's actually the whole agency. That licensing did work on developing the questions. That the survey has gone out. It's about 4 questions, and asking stakeholders about whether or not if they've experienced any gaps in the service since March of 2020. That it's literally 4 questions: what type of license types, what type of license they have, and they could pick more than 1 license. And then, of course, that how satisfied are they with the services? And it goes everywhere from speaks to enforcement, licensing, adjudications, public meetings, examiners, finance. So we try to hit every area that they can, again, pick several areas if they were satisfied, dissatisfied, or hadn't had a problem at all with those other divisions. But I did want to let you know that went out on Friday, that I reached out to to 5 of our folks, you know, on the liquor side to make sure that some of the, you know, that the Washington Wine Association was aware of it. Josh and Annie and Katie and Vicky, and, you know, so folks were aware the survey was coming. They could encourage their licensees and the folks that they work with to respond to the survey, because it is important, as you said, for us to know if there has been service gaps in remote work, that we know what those are and we're able to address it. So again, I'll report back as soon as we, probably about a month goes by, so we can see what we've heard.
Thank you for that, because that was I had that written down on my question for you is, what's the status of that? So thank you.
Gone, did it. And I think for me, I think that's about it.
Okay, great. Thank you for the report. Appreciate it. We will move to the other Smith, Communications and Media update from Communications Director Brian Smith. Brian.
Chair Postman and Member Garrett, thanks for having me. As Becky often says, no relation there on the Smiths. Just going forward, there's a few of us in the world, of course. Hey, just a few highlights today. As you are most likely aware, we hit a major milestone on the Ccrs, formerly known as Traceability Project, where we held a webinar. It's the first real engagement since we began the process of figuring out what this system might look like with our licensees and labs and integrators, et cetera. We had 347 attendees that were part of that. That number I thought was a little low, but when you consider that many of the licensees likely will be looking to their integrator to be paying attention to that and see what they need. But also we are going to post all that information online, and they can watch it later at their convenience. So it's always going to be up there. As we speak right now, members of my staff are working with Brad to post up the user's guide and other documentation that everyone is going to need. This is, since we first announced this, this is stuff that people have been waiting for, and we're providing them that detail now, and we'll continue to. This has been a very collaborative effort in getting us to this point. You know, this is the latest step in a communications plan that we laid out that started with internal messaging and then external messaging and notifying the governor's office and the talking points. We developed a website. If you've taken a look at that now, there's a section of our website that's dedicated to this information because people are going to be going there. This is a big deal. And as you know, with the history of the traceability project, what licensees are most interested in knowing, is this system going to work and work fine for us? And what do we need to know? We think that we're on top of that. We're providing them what they need. And I'm feeling good about where we're at, as I know every did. But just wanted to stress that collaborative nature of all the divisions and all the folks that were involved in this, because it's gone fairly well. And we've relied on each other, I think, to be able to get it to this point. So kudos to the rest of the folks. On another topic, David, as you know, Communications is a member of the policy team, and just so this group is aware, is that we're always looking at our allowances. We're taking on new issues that come in from the regulated stakeholder groups, et cetera. And one of the issues that we've discussed at that policy team was with the rise of the Delta variant. And we having expired most of our allowances back in on July 31st. Is there anything that we wanted to be able to update and maybe like bring back and reactivate, I guess is the term. And David's a part of that. Justin and Audrey and I had gone back and made recommendations for some of the cannabis allowances, primarily dealing with curbside service, which ended on July 31st, walk-up windows, which ended at the time, and allowing a licensee to give away a mask on the premises. We made a decision as the policy team to allow that to happen. And so Communications worked to pretty much revamp that section of our website to make it simple and put out a message right away to stakeholders. That's been pretty positively, maybe you've heard some of that in your own circles, responded to. So many of the licensees are glad to have that and see us be responsive to their concerns. And so we said, and on October 31st, that we will let them know whether these are going to be extended, whether it's still possible and still needed, and we will do that as a group. Next is something I don't typically talk about here is, but with Rick not being here, he's got a number of upcoming speaking engagements and presentations that I always kind of work with him on behind the scenes. He's got just 4 coming up over a 10-day period starting next week. He's doing a podcast with Bruce Turcotte with the AG's group, which is called the AG Alliance Cannabis Project. You've heard Bruce talk about that before with this group, and some other presentations coming up. And I'm working to get what he needs and working with him on that and get that stuff ready and out the door. I'm actually going to be out next week. With him being gone this week, we're pushing our schedules to try and align so that he's got everything when I'm out the door. But my staff can help fill in any gaps that anyone needs, whether that's anyone here or Rick. Just looking down the road, I will always be involved in all of the things that we do that you heard from Chandra and Becky and others about what our role is. I just want to emphasize that I do want that CCRS project to always be in motion for our licensees and for our stakeholders to make sure that we are on top of that. And I know that I'm going to be focused on it. And the members of my staff, we talk about it a lot. And just lastly, you know, on the media stuff, it continues to come in. You know, we'll get a couple a day. A lot of localized ones right now around the mask mandate, wanting to know about particular places in their community. As you would understand, David, I mean, that's a typical thing that you see, et cetera. But ongoing, you know, stuff has been typical. There hasn't been anything that's really stood out of late that we've been working on from a media point that I couldn't answer, you know, with just a quick inquiry or a quick answer. Is there any questions?
Ollie, anything? No. Thanks, Brian. You know, the allowances thing is so tough because I think we all thought we were in this ramp down stage, and we did a lot of work around that, and then it started to ramp up very quickly. And so, you know, I think that we don't know that every single thing that existed a year ago will exist again now. We don't know if we need it. We don't have business closures the same way we had in the first year of the pandemic. But we're also just, you know, so both for licensees and their customers to know, we obviously are very aware of what's going on with the virus statewide. We're trying to be dynamic and flexible in that way. And if we need to do things to try to help like we did last time, we're going to be open to do that. So, and I appreciate the how closely you're working with the policy people to make sure that that's out. In fact, I got a note today forwarded to me when the governor's office gets questions from constituents, it gets sent back through a chain. And one of them was from a licensee asking about why can't I give masks away? So hasn't quite caught up, but we will do that and forward that on. In fact, I should forward that to you, Brian, and I will. So yeah, that's great. Appreciate it.
Yes.
Okay. And now we will move to our general agency update with Deputy Director Tony Hood today. Tony.
Good afternoon. I just wanted to start by recognizing everyone that worked on that CCRS webinar that you've heard several people talk about. They really did a great job. And I know it took a lot of time to make that go smoothly. And they also answered a lot of questions from the public. And so I thought that was very helpful that they could answer all those questions. They're going to be putting out an FAQ in addition to the user guide, so that team is working very hard.
That's great.
Director Bingham and I are working on reviewing all the updates related to the state vaccination mandate. We have reviewed the state agency vaccination accommodation guidelines, and Director Bingham continues to meet with other small agencies that are similarly situated to us, with people that go out in a regulatory capacity and interact with the public. She has met with parks, fish and wildlife, gambling, and they've all been in ongoing discussions specifically about what happens if someone is granted an exemption, can an accommodation be made? So she's working carefully with our AAGs on that. As of yesterday, we had about 221 people report to HR that they have been vaccinated and they've shown their card to HR so we can mark them off. We had about 38 people ask for exemption forms, but of course we know that not all of them will be submitting them for exemptions, but at least 38 forms have gone out. We are going to be talking with Director Garza tomorrow about accommodations and what we've learned from OFM and what we can and can't do regarding that. We know that people are very anxious to hear back from us regarding the exemptions that they're going to request and whether or not we'll be able to do an appropriate accommodation for them. We currently have approximately 54 vacancies right now, which I thought was kind of high, but I don't know all of the history. 7 of those vacancies are likely going to be positions that were made for a project that simply need to be eliminated. So in reality, it's probably closer to 47 vacancies. And as you probably know, there is ongoing recruitment for enforcement officers. So we have several positions open there at the first level and at the second level. Those are ongoing. So I know that HR is working hard with all of our recruitments to try to fill as much as we can. Regarding another subject, Director Brady talked about the proposed federal legislation, the Cannabis Administration and Opportunity Act. As she mentioned, Justin has led us in several groups where we've gone paragraph by paragraph and discussed where we have questions about the act, where there's some confusion, where we think it might conflict with Washington law. And that's been a great group. A lot of good people have been giving their input, and he's been taking notes, and all of those comments can be forwarded via Chris to the appropriate people. And we are working on our strategic plan, updating that. The agency has met some of the goals, and we need to incorporate the work the agency has done in the strategic plan. And we are meeting at the first week of October to talk about that and also see if there's any small modifications or tweaks that should be done to the strategic plan. We have 2 long sessions on our calendar for all the directors to come so we can talk about that. And we're going to try to do that in person, but of course that's always subject to change. And finally, tomorrow is the kickoff for the combined fund drive. Sue Lavoie, I hope I said that right, has agreed to head up the committee this year for CFD, and we'll be going to the leadership kickoff breakfast together. She and I, it's virtual, but we'll be virtually attending the breakfast and then proceeding with the fundraising efforts that this agency does every year. And do you have any questions for me?
Will they give you virtual bacon and eggs?
Well, apparently you could arrange to pick up a breakfast.
Oh, really? Oh, that's great.
Yeah, I am not picking up a breakfast, but I think that they made accommodation. They made arrangements for that, so they're really trying hard, and we're looking forward to that tomorrow.
Great. One quick question on accommodation. So, and you and I talked about this, and I think I wasn't getting it straight in my head. When we talk about accommodation in these cases, it is only for people who have an exemption, right? This is not, if you can accommodate me, I don't need to meet that. Can you mute, Ollie? Sorry, I was getting noise.
Sorry.
It's okay. It's okay. Do I have that right now? What we're talking about is if you get an exemption, which means you're not going to have a vaccine, we will look for a way for you to work that doesn't jeopardize the public or coworkers or anybody's health, right?
Yes, that is correct.
Thank you.
And so,
Okay.
well, yeah, we look at their current job position and their current job duties, and we see if we can accommodate. And then if we can't do it, then we look at, are there other vacancies that they could fill, or would they be interested in something else that we might have open that they could do safely and that they would have the skill set to accomplish.
And what happens if there's not a slot like that, but you have an exemption?
Well, if we can't accommodate you, then you it may turn out that you're no longer employed with LCB.
Even with an exemption?
Yes. So an
Wow.
exemption
Okay.
does not guarantee that you will continue your employment with LCB or with the state of Washington for that matter.
Okay.
Tony, my question is, because I know I went through this with the DIS position. Are we making sure in HR when we are posting our open positions, if they are virtual positions, that we're specifying that and that people don't think that this is a position that's in Olympia only?
Well, what we are doing is indicating that telework is an option. I don't know that we're specifically saying that it is 100% virtual, but we are indicating telework is an option. And we are also indicating in our postings that the mandate is there for the vaccination. And so if someone inquires further, then we would explain the exemption process to them. But as far as the posting goes, it's simply referring to telework and flexibility, and then we can address the specific questions depending on the position and the business need.
All right, thank you.
Mm-hmm.
Great. Good. Okay. Thank you. Anything further, John?
Nope, that's all I have. Thank you.
And then it is on the agenda time for any other department reports. So I'll just pause 1 second, see if anybody has anything else they want to add to the meeting from the staff team. Hearing none. Anything more, Ollie, today? And then without, we will adjourn. I would just say on behalf of the board real quick, should have said this earlier, but congratulations to Lieutenants Sigmund and Hackenberg for their promotions. And our Dustin Dixon, 5 years now with the LCB. I just saw his certificate, so congratulations, Dustin. And with that, we will adjourn the executive management team for September 8th. Thank you all.